Mel Rowe is an advocate, truth teller and photographer with a deep commitment to the conservation and celebration of Australia's brumbies. For over a decade, she has been documenting their lives through photography and writing. As a founding president of the Snowy Mountains Brumby Registry, Mel has led initiatives on Brumby DNA research and heritage preservation. With several universities here and overseas, she has also worked in Kosciuszko National Park as a guide for Cochran Horse Treks during this time. Mel is also an open space specialist and urban planner, bringing expertise in sustainable urban design and ecological stewardship. Mel's main project at the moment is challenging the invasive narrative and looking at the ethics around the situation and the power and the narrative spin of the Invasive Species Council. Mel, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me this morning.
You know, I'm going to be a little careful here because we have incurred the wrath, I believe, of the Invasive Species Council. And perhaps, and I may make comment later, I might just shut my mouth, which is highly unlikely, but they also need to understand censorship does not, well, it does exist, but for a private company to tell me to shut up and disassociate ourselves with Facebook is highly irregularity, highly, it's just terrible. Tell me about your thoughts on the cull. And I'm going to be very careful because I don't want to, I mean, there's some people who actually believe this wacko stuff. And yeah, and I respect that. If they believe it, yeah, I have my opinion, they have their opinion. That's what a democracy is all about. But it seems to be that if you oppose this cull, if you oppose the slaughter of beautiful animals, the torture of beautiful animals that are as much part of Australia as you and I are, it does need some sort of investigation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, it's hard to know where to actually start with this conversation about where we're at right now. You know, I think that it's important that we understand that everybody that's involved that is pro-Brumby, you know, also loves that environment and those mountains. You know, they're not, you know, mutually exclusive in the sense that because I love the horses, I therefore don't really appreciate the environment. And that's just not the case. I think, you know, one of the biggest problems that we've had is that we just haven't had the engagement from the government, and there has been absolutely no intent from them to actually adhere to or you know, work with the legislation in order for this to be a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just looking at the website, I mean, it's just a website and it has a whole bunch of gobbledygook, which I don't agree with. But I'm not saying that they're bad people at all. The facts will say that, but the narrative is just. You wonder, I ask the question, what pull do they have with governments? And again, if governments believe in climate change, which is based on a lie, shows you that the education system has not worked at all. And you just need to talk to a geologist to find out, you know, how we are faring, how the planet is faring, and what will happen next, because history does repeat. So so what we're finding out that we've, you know, we stood on the toes of people who don't want us to question their narrative, and we're allowed to. They, you know, say what they like about us, and vice versa. But we, you know, just personally, and the thousands and thousands, you know, 40, 50,000 others that have also voiced their opinion. Australians don't want this happening. The majority don't want this happening to their fellow Aussies, and Brumbies are just that.
Oh, exactly right. And, you know, I want to point out here that one of the fundamental things that we need to remember is that, you know, the Invasive Species Council are not a conservation NGO. They're a political lobby group. They don't actually undertake any conservation work on the ground, unlike bush heritage or other conservation groups. They have the ear of the government, and they also have the purse strings of the government, and they're acting like a regulator rather than a conservation advisor. And, it's extremely frustrating to find all of this being undertaken without any scrutiny whatsoever, because, Mike, you and I both know that if we were in private industry, that our business and our operational activities would be audited on a regular basis to ensure that we were undertaking our activities best practice. This is not happening. And from my perspective, creating a crisis and demonising an animal to the point where we are shooting them out of choppers is not conservation. There is no conservation crisis big enough for us to justify this mass cruelty. There just isn't, I'm afraid. And I think that anybody that's spent any time in those mountains knows that the impact from the horses is negligible.
The other thing that disturbs me, Chris Minns, because they kept denying, the New South Wales government kept denying that there had been any nefarious activities in regards to the health of the horses, and that they were humanely looked after. And when questioned on Ben Fordham, and they used a clip on the other night, he said that the cull was done in a very humane way, which it's not. But it was done, it said, compared to recently, where they used to round up all the horses, 20 at a time, shoo them into a cage, and then shoot them. Now, for years, Chris Minns and the government had been denying that all along. And he's come out and said the exact opposite. The next thing, Chris Minns, by the way, who is advised by the Invasive Species Council, along with other governments around Australia. They advise them because they are the experts, inverted commas, on what we Australians should have for the future. And they were not voted in, by the way, at all. They're just a private bunch of people I have got no respect for. That's just me. But when you have Chris Minns talking about, then he said, we want the park to be inclusive of everybody, something like that. Not the exact words, but we want them to enjoy it, go for walks, runs, and enjoy hunting. Now, I thought Ben Fordham did not pick him up. Now, when they say enjoy hunting, you think, hunting what? Now, next year, the horses have no protection. So if you look at what he's saying and enjoy hunting, and we take off the protection for the horses, what do they hunt? Can you tell me? It's not the horses. Because he's actually said
this is already happening.
Yes.
We see it a lot. And people that are in the park a lot see horses that have been killed by rogue hunters, injured by rogue hunters. We've had well-documented cases like Arrow Boy up in the northern end, where those people were prosecuted for using crossbows, killing 2 colts and injuring another. And then, those people were put before the court and prosecuted, and then 12 months later, parks went out and shot those horses up. There's no rhyme or reason to anything that happens, but what your point is that what they've done is they have dehumanised this animal, they've scapegoated it, and they have no value and they have no agency. And, they are normalising cruelty and using it under the guise of conservation. This is just appalling behaviour. And for Chris Minns to allow this to occur on his watch is disgraceful. This department needs to be fully investigated and independently audited, because what we are seeing and the recent history of this program is that they are not conducting themselves in an appropriate manner. They are not being transparent. They are not engaging with stakeholders. They're not taking the time, and I think Peter and Lisa and Shannon have all raised those issues, that we are not being heard. You know, the government is trying to sweep this under the carpet and get this done as quickly as they possibly can. And, you know, this is the frustrating factor for some of us, because we're not bleeding hearts. We know the horses need to be managed. We're not saying that the legislation put them above our native species. That's not the case at all. You know, there is this attitude and ideology, and it's a frozen moment where we pick an arbitrary point in time and we decide where everything belongs. This is not the way that we should be operating. And, you know, the New South Wales government has their own framework called Connecting to Country, and the planning minister brought this out, and it's a well-published document. And every project that's undertaken in New South Wales, that is their first port of call, is connecting with country and talking to elders on the land that they're working and negotiating projects moving forward. This is not happening. And that top-down militant attitude that's coming from the New South Wales government is in complete breach of this framework that's been developed.
I just I find this truly, the more I look into it, and by the way, in a past life, we dealt with many things that are very complex, various countries, and we did a very good job. We did such a good job that they ended up shutting us down. But we had big numbers. But this to me, the more I look at it, it's like an octopus, and the tentacles are going places where I don't want it to go to, and it's absolutely abhorrent what is happening to these horses. One guy on Facebook last night compared them to toads, and I'm thinking, where have we lost our sense of being? You know, the Australia used to be such a great country that we had each other's backs, and I still think we've probably got that. But at the moment, we're busy enough looking after our own, because we are always under attack. There's always new legislation coming in. You know, you've got to drive an EV. You have to have the EV because it's good for you. No, the EV, by the way, creates more damage to the environment when they make it and stuff, and the batteries and whatever, than a fuel-driven car up until 8 years. Now, you try selling an EV after 8 years, you can't, because you've got to replace the battery, which is another $42,000. So a car you bought for 50 is you can sell it for 10. That's about it, because you've got to put a new battery in it. So it goes on like this. Then you have the Chris Bowen thing. So they're all sort of tied in. You know, the renewables, look at the intrusion of the farmers and the inhumane activity from government towards them. Look at the environment, look at the Great Dividing Range where the renewables going up, and it's completely wiping out the top of the dividing range. And it's just desecrated this part of Australia. No one is saying anything, because we're going to destroy the planet first to save it. So when we have this issue with the horses, and it was a very simple thing: don't kill those horses. There is no need to. You can do fertility treatment and whatever you want. So therefore, they don't have foals. You can do it properly, or you can not farm them out, but make sure other organisations look after it, like the military. As a friend of ours in just outside of Sydney, he has 2 brumbies, and they look after soldiers with PTSD. So the horse, this Brumby, is an intricate part of Australia. And to have an organisation such as the ISC telling me and telling everybody else, they're not voted in, by the way, telling us how Australia will be in 10 or 20 years' time, because we're doing a great job killing them, is unacceptable. And it is not Australia. You do not treat your fellow Aussies like that. And I saw another one. I'm going to mention this, Jack, because it's exactly what you said on an interview. You said, oh, it's all these people, who are, you know, the ones that oppose the lockdowns. Beg your pardon. First of all, it is not. But you are creating this image of these raggedy rabble people, a group of people. That is wrong. The lockdowns, by the way, have been proved that everything that people were pushing on, how bad they were, it has been proven by every country in the world and given the thumbs up that it was abhorrent and it was a mistake. So perhaps you need to come out of your shell a bit and look at what's happening now, Jack. So I'm very angry, and I wasn't going to do this, but I thought about it all night. I had little sleep, and it's not fair on the horses. These horses are Australian, and if we go down the path of Victoria, where the horses in the high country are just about all gone because they were an invasive species, that is a disgrace, and Australians need to know this. I don't have to create slander or defamatory comments. You're doing that yourself, Jack, and the the Invasive Species Council. I'm not doing it. You are. I'm just telling people what you've done. So I apologise, but I've been really thinking about this, and you've brought up some great points. I mean, why aren't the governments listening to people like you, all those that deal with these beautiful creatures that make their living, make their life, and from generations to generations to generations have been part of, for example, the Kosciuszko National Park? Why aren't they listening? Can you tell me?
I think because they've been sold a narrative, and you know, I mean, Jack Goff's approach is almost like psychological conditioning, right? His level of arrogance, even with mainstream media, is eye-watering. You know, one of the problems that I think we've faced, and I'll bring it back to the DNA, and that was that the research that Sydney University undertook with the Registry was to look at relatedness and inbreeding levels in Kosciuszko National Park and the populations there, so that we could determine what a sustainable population looked like. I mean, we don't even know what the carrying capacity of these areas are within the park, and we're talking about a carrying capacity for native species, let alone the introduced species. So we're working off a platform where we have no basis of the management that's being undertaken. And, you know, we should be looking at best practice. We've got a neighbour just across the ditch in New Zealand that seems to be able to manage their horses in a manner that is far more humane than what we are doing. And, you know, the government needs to remember that these horses are part of our social fabric and our identity as a country. And there is room for these animals. They do meet the criteria for heritage. And the legislation states that. And, you know, the government should have adhered to the legislation, worked with stakeholders for a win-win situation. We could be in a very different place right now if certain people hadn't got involved and had the ear of the government.
Yeah, it's you are right. It's a lobby. The history with Jack. I mean, you know, he did obviously a very good job as a lobbyist and working as an advisor. So nothing against him there. What I do have a problem is that, first of all, this is what, as he said, I quote you, Jack, as I know you are listening and watching at the moment. I quote you. This is bullshit, and it is. You need to. This. I'll bite my tongue here. This needs to stop. Of course, no, we'll probably get a letter from them saying a cease and desist and we're going to take you off. I've said nothing. We've said nothing. That is not so obvious. That is not on their website. So we're not attacking, you know, making stories up. Looking at us right in the eye at the moment, they're shooting horses. They're shooting these beautiful horses. And according to Chris Minns, they've had other abhorrent ways of killing horses by rounding them up into pens and shooting them. I mean, this is not how we should act. This is not Australia. When you hear and read this and see these things, it must make you want to vomit, because it makes me want to vomit.
Oh, you know, I think, and Peter would reinforce this, you know, we were some of the first people into the park after the 2020 fires, and we spent days riding that country looking for injured wildlife. I don't recall ever seeing Jack up there during the fires while we were all struggling with what was going on. These people are speaking on behalf of something that they know nothing about and have no involvement in. And, he is so tenacious with his political lobbying that, anybody that looks at this has to ask themselves, this is not about conservation at all. And the more we all look into it, the more we realise that this has absolutely nothing to do with conservation. There is a small faction of the scientific community that got extremely upset about the horses having legislation put in place to protect them, and they have done their darndest ever since to have that legislation repealed and those horses removed from the park. And there is room for everybody in that park. We're talking about an area, and Peter and Lisa and everybody has, mentioned this area of the park is a highly used area, and the footprint from Snowy 2 in that particular area is significant. And so I fail to see the invasive species argument about the impact of the horses when we are looking at what is happening to that park, not just in the subalpine region, but also in the alpine region where Vale Resorts, are operating in the main range. We're talking about roller coasters and mountain bike parks, and now we want an adventure park in Jindabyne. This is all double standards. But one point I really do want to make, and that is that if it was you and I, we'd be in jail for this type of behaviour. And if we were, a business, as I mentioned before, we would be audited on a regular basis and our operations scrutinised so that we could operate and have accreditation, or, we could meet our requirements for, insurance and safety and all of those elements that every Australian business needs to undertake. And yet somehow this government department is able to ride roughshod over all of us and get away with this cruelty. And it's as you said, it's got to stop, and we have to keep this conversation going. I want to urge every resident of New South Wales to sign the petitions. This is our chance to table these petitions in Parliament and finally have this opened up and looked into.
Tell me about the just a couple of other things here. The role of mainstream media. Now, I mean, a Current Affair did a story, and I've been a journo and worked in the industry. I'm a terrible person. I've done nothing else but this, and worked in many countries around the world. And what they did was it was a hit job with a pillow. So therefore, they show the emotional people. Oh, it's emotional, which it is emotional. Then they have the one that's where we know what we're doing. This is all bullshit. This is all bullshit. Sorry, and so the tone is from we know what we're doing, and the emotional ninnies out there. Oh, they're getting upset. Well, they need to grow up. That's the sort of thing we're trying to tell them. We're here to make their life. It's how we want their lives to be. And that's what it was. So the job was a really bad one, but that's mainstream media. And if you look at what happened a few years ago, and they all try and turn their attention to, oh no, we didn't really mean that, like Carl Stefanovic. Oh, get the jab. And, no, I made a mistake. Okay, Carl, which are you, left or right, or are you going after the buck? And we know what it's all about. So there's another letter from the cease and desist, but it's obvious. It is so obvious because I've been in this all my life. It's just like, oh, really? And most times you ignore them, except when they start impacting on our lives, and they are impacting our lives. So legacy media and a lot of the independent media, are right behind, the culling of the horses. They're stamping on those little frogs and stuff. And by the way, to look after our environment, as in looking after these these almost extinct species, good on you. I think that's fantastic. But it doesn't mean we have to go back to before Captain Cook landed. We need to live in with each other. So therefore, these horses who have done their best, and they're the descendants of these horses who looked after us in wars, who've been on the police honour rolls. So these horses are not. You're really hitting, or you should be. People in Australia should be understanding that they're hitting the essence of what makes Australia Australia, and that is we have our backs of our mates. And so, what's your views on the media? Because I really haven't seen much except a little bit there and a bit there, and it is slanted, except for Chris Smith on 2SM.
Oh, look, it hasn't been good. The relationship with the media has been appalling, to be honest. And, I think most of us feel that, and myself personally, I don't actually talk to the media anymore because it's taken out of context, or your very important points that you're trying to make end up on the cutting room floor. So, my concern with journalism is they've got a whole gamut of problems going on, but there is no investigative journalism anymore. And what I'm seeing is media releases are being sent, to media outlets, and they're just merely printing these media releases and not looking into the actual facts behind any of what's going on. One of the points I wanted to make about the DNA and about these horses is we have a very unique situation where we're geographically isolated from the rest of the world. And, the DNA research that, has been done to date, highlights the unique genetics of these horses. And what is out there is genetically very viable, because what isn't doesn't survive. There has been opportunity for the government to work with us, again, in this win-win, but we're finding that the media are selling a narrative that they've been sold. And, to me, they're bought. We can't get clear, objective interviewing from mainstream media. It's just not happening.
Tell me, pushing the narrative, who are the beneficiaries?
Sorry, say that again. Who are the beneficiaries of this narrative that's being sold?
Yeah, yep. Who would they be, do you think?
If you're asking my opinion, I think that, people like Mr. Goff, this is very personal for him. He's a CEO of a political lobby group, so it's in his best interest to make sure that, he gets the job done. I see Jack a little bit like the guy on the Simpsons episode that's selling everyone the monorail. And I'm sure that there are conversations in Parliament at the moment where some people are probably coming to the realisation that Jack did sell them a monorail that isn't going to work. And, one of the big problems is when you start telling lies, you have to keep telling lies, and those lies get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think we're starting to see that, in particular with the recent count. You strip those figures back and they're just not making any sense at all. I mean, I cannot fathom how we can have a 270% increase in population growth in the southern region of Kosciuszko. It's just not feasible. I mean, we all know scientifically that wild horse populations grow between, around 17% per annum, 22% in really, really optimum conditions. I mean, the government is trying to tell us that the horses are sitting around 37 to 41% in the northern end and 270% in the southern end. And, I mean, not only are the horses having foals, but the frogs are also having foals, the deers are having foals, the pigs are having foals. we got some problems here. And really, for me, this is actually very damaging to the science community, what is happening with Invasive Species Council. It has taken years for environmental science to have social licence and value from a political perspective. And what this group are doing are destroying any credibility and any faith that the public has in environmental science. It's really, even from my perspective, it's quite concerning.
It is, and I mean, I'm not too up to speed with the monorail and Jack, but I'll take it on advisement. Tell me about the Invasive Species Council. Are they mixed up with climate and the UN Agenda 2030?
No, look, they're not. I have looked into that. They're not associated with the UN's Agenda 2030. They do use 2030 as part of their strategic plan, but there are a lot of organisations that use that as a foundation for their own strategic planning. Climate, likewise, I think they sometimes overlap, but it's important because whenever we raise the argument about snowy hydro, they're very quick to remind you that they only deal with invasive species. They're not looking at the climate. They're not looking at what snowy hydro do. They're mainly concerned on this invasive thing that they have going. And I have to ask you, and the rest of the public, that this is all well and good what Jack thinks that he's doing, but when you continue to work from a reactionary perspective and not a holistic perspective, you're always going to be behind the eight ball, and I will give support to, national parks in the sense that department has always had, very low funding from the government. And this is where I'm saying they're finally getting agency. They're finally getting, some acknowledgement that there is value in the environment. And then we have a little faction come in and they're actually doing more damage than they realise by carrying on this way. We can't keep doing what we're doing. We've got the highest extinction rate in the world. If you go up into that park and you look at the fuel load and the invasive weeds up there and the problems that we have, it's very hard for us local people to stand back and blame the horses. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in that park and it has absolutely nothing to do with the Brumbies at all.
I agree. Maybe we could get the Roundup out, stuff like glyphosate and paraquat in it, the stuff that it gives you Alzheimer's. Maybe we could get that out and spray that on the things, and anybody that decides to eat that's going to be up for a fairly short cognitive lifestyle, because it does create Alzheimer's and dementia. And they use it. In fact, they use paraquat in various countries in tests to bring on Alzheimer's. So it's a terrible, terrible thing. Of course, Australia, most of the world has said, no, we can't use that. Australia says, oh, it's all right, just don't drink too much of it, I mean, Australia is a contradiction, isn't it, in many ways? On one hand, we're going to save the planet. On the other hand, we're going to destroy it. Does that frustrate you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you should see what's happening with the renewables project up here. I mean, there are just swathes of, old growth forest being stripped bare for these, KVA towers and this renewable project. It's really frustrating to see. And I know that, I have friends that are, traditional custodians, and they have been invited to meetings with Snowy Hydro where they've been shown artefacts that the project has damaged. And there is just, you have to ask yourself the commerciality of what's happening here. What is the life cycle of what we're doing, and what's the ultimate cost? And I agree with you. Who is benefiting from this? Because from every situation and every position that I look at, I don't see the Australian people actually winning out of this at all. And the environment is certainly not winning out of this at all.
Yeah, I mean, just the thought that there are. Yesterday, it was brought on that we were discussing in the conversation there that there are about 800. He thinks 800 brumbies left, but look at the high country in Victoria. I don't think there's any left, and it's just terrible. And you have to. I mean, I know that we have a state, for example, in Kosciuszko, a state body. I think, what is it called? Parks and Wildlife, what do they call themselves? But they and I know there are some very good people there. But if what Chris Minns said was correct, and you can't blame the invasive species for this, if it's correct, which it probably is, because he's gone out and made it public that they used to round up the horses and put them into a pen and then shoot them. I mean, we you know what, we actually do need a royal commission. That's what we do need, because this has been going on for so long that it's become part of the filth has become part of way of life. And if you look at the reporting of this, which is slanted or wrong, the reporting has been basically, as you said, from those press releases, which if you go back a couple of years, that's what the media cycle was. They get the broadcast. They had the same text, the same message, the same words, because they used a press release, because they were lazy. And the same thing here. So we have to ask ourselves, why are we heading down this path? Why are we allowing that these horses be killed? I know that many within the Invasive Species Council don't like horses. And, you know, I mean, I have a friend who thought horses were terrorists, but 7 foot taller, because they were big. So they're actually beautiful, beautiful creatures. But take away all that. You do not treat fellow Aussies that way, and they are Australian. They fought in the wars. They are as much a part of Australia as you and I and Chris Minns and Christopher and the whole lot. They are part of Australia. And this is not how we should be. Our legacy should not be of cruelty. It should be of preservation and of embracing our past, because our past determines our future.
It's embarrassing. I know you mentioned it in your previous interviews that, what the world is looking at the moment and what we're doing. And it is appalling. Peter brought up the Sydney Olympics. That is a fundamental milestone when we're looking at the identity of Australia, and currently it's almost as if we're in a wave or an era of shaming that cultural history and heritage. Yes, they are our fellow Australians. Those horses have every right to be there. Just like apparently Snowy Hydro has every right to be there, and Vale Resorts and the mountain bike track. So, all we're saying is that there needs to be, transparency, there needs to be humane management, there needs to be consultation with stakeholders. I think now what's happened is we have got to a point where it has got so bad that the management should be taken away from the New South Wales government. This is what I will be pushing. I think these horses should be recognised under Commonwealth law, and I think that there does need to be a Royal Commission. This department does need to be stripped back bare, and questions do need to be asked. And I think that we need to stop what we're doing. Let's just stop what we're doing. Let's go back to the table and let's start asking some questions about what is the best way forward. My concerns are, and have been, that we now have some isolated populations that are now non-existent or non-viable, and that this has been a deliberate attempt by the government, and their lies that they are peddling about, Chris Minns coming in with his nice softly spoken voice placating the public, stating that he wants the horses to remain. I mean, this is all, again, this is all very strategic. There is no effort and no interest in keeping any of those horses in the park from the current government. And this also needs to be looked into, because since the Labor government have come in and since this whole episode has started, it has just spiralled into something that is now absolutely shameful. And I know that there are many Australians that are absolutely ashamed at what is happening. I don't even have a facility or enough crayons to try and explain what is happening here with our horses. It is just absolutely abhorrent, and everybody should be outraged.
Tell me, you've dealt with horses. They're part of your whole makeup. They're part of Australia's makeup too, by the way. And I spoke to Peter and the people we've spoken to all about whose life evolves around the horse. Tell us about the Brumby itself. Tell us about its personality, its intelligence, its love for humans, its love for its... Tell us about that.
Oh, they're incredible horses. They're very forgiving, Brumbies. I noticed that Shannon mentioned it, in his interview, that they are a clean slate. They haven't been affected or, impacted genetically by line breeding. That they are unique. They have the ability to take on any type of discipline in the equine world, and we've seen some fantastic examples from, show jumping to, natural horsemanship to dressage, to team penning to barrel racing. I mean, these horses are incredibly unique, and they have personalities, and they, work very well as therapy horses as well. I have a little Brumby at my place here, and, he came to me at 5 days old, and he's been hand raised and super, super intelligent. They have, beautiful natures. They really do. And they make fantastic kids' ponies. They just, as I said, are so forgiving and, just beautiful horses.
Yeah, it's very sad. We were going to talk for 20 minutes, but I have to apologise. Sometimes I do get emotional. I'm almost a blubbering mess the other day, and this thing, I think we all need to be so upset at what's happening. These are God's creatures. These are Australia's. They're our heritage. They are. It's, we talk about the kangaroos and stuff. The horse, the Brumby, went to war. It went to war. It died. It died with us. It fought with us. And the least we can do is say, "Good job. Now we're going to give you and your predecessors, and although we need to give you, some sort of respect." Do you think that word respect? I mean, if we're looking for a word, respect seems to never be mentioned in this anymore. We don't respect that. We want to do that because we decide what we're going to do.
Well, this is where I think, I was talking before about this connection to country and the framework that the New South Wales government has developed, and that is coming from that holistic, very much Indigenous, circular type ecology where we're part of nature. We're not here to control it, and this is part of this whole excuse me, reactionary management, top-down, militant style operational activities where we're, treating an animal like an object. And, those horses have feelings and are sentient beings just like you and I are, and they have very complex social groups, and they're fascinating to watch. And I think that has been one of the biggest things that has upset me about this whole program is their mandate to gut shoot these pregnant mares. I mean, I'm sorry, they're just, as I said before, there is no conservation crisis big enough for us to justify what is happening to these horses. They do deserve respect, absolutely. Mankind, owes the horse their life and their evolution. There is no other animal on this planet that has walked with mankind like the horse has. And for us at this day and age, with what we know, and to proclaim that we are a civilised, developed country, to be acting in this behaviour and this manner is, as I said, completely abhorrent.
I totally agree. We have run out of time. I apologise for talking too much, and what a great conversation. I mean, it's breakfast time at the moment, but I think we just need to take stock. No one hates people. We don't hate people. We just need that respect shown to such an iconic part of Australia's history, a great part of our being. We need to show that respect. There are other ways. You do not need to shoot them. There are other ways. They deserve that respect, and they are Aussies. And Aussies do not do this. Well, we didn't once, we do now, but we don't do this with fellow Aussies. Mel, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Oh, look, I'm around and about, and I'm a big supporter. I run a Facebook page called Australian Brumby, I'm supporting those that are supporting the Brumbies.
Yeah, I think you're doing a magnificent job. I tip my hat to you, ma'am, and thank you so much for your time. This is the Country Telegraph.
Tell my fool I kept on running. Tell my mare I heard her cry. Tell the mountain I belonged here. Tell the wind I said goodbye. Brumby hoofprints etched for generations in the snow. I've watched the foals become the mares, the stallions old and slow. Here in the snowy mountains where my life began, across hills, ridges and open plains my fellow Brumbies ran. I led them through winter storms, drought and summer rain, but I can't outrun what follows now. Shield my family from this pain. My ancestors crossed the oceans, but I was born upon this land. These mountains are my birthplace, the Snowies are my clan. These mountains hold our memories, our family history. If home is where you're raised, then this is where we should be. Tell my foal I kept on running. Tell my mare I heard her cry. Tell the mountain I belonged here. Tell the wind I said goodbye. Stay close beside me, little one. The thunder isn't rain. The sky itself is hunting us, and I cannot stop the pain. I gather those I love and turn to face the sound. Though every instinct tells me run, there's nowhere left for us now. These mountains hold our memories, our family history. If home is where you're raised, then this is where we should be. as I fall upon the ground. Thunder. Again and again, my heart grows quiet as bullets rain. I thought I had more seasons, more rivers left to roam, more sunrises with my Kosciuszko clan before the mountains called me home. Tell them I was born here, my grandfathers fought their wars. Remind them that this was our home. The snowy mountains were ours. Tell my fool I knew her fear. Tell my mare I heard her call. Tell my fool I tried to save them. Tell the wind how brumbies fall. Tell my fool I kept on running. Tell my mare I heard her cry. Tell the mountain I belonged here. Tell the wind I said goodbye.